W. Scott Olsen is a photographer, writer, and longtime professor at Concordia College. His work blends documentary insight with a deep sense of place. In this episode of the Crit House Book Edition, Scott joins us to talk about his new book, Fargo Street, published by Frames Magazine. Fargo Street is a street photographer's portrait of downtown Fargo and Moorhead, capturing humor, humanity, and unexpected beauty. With patience, empathy, and a sharp eye, Scott shows how even the most familiar streets can reveal something true, timeless, and worth seeing. Well, Scott Olsen, welcome back to the Crit House. You have been with us before, and
Thank you, sir.
And you are back with us because you have published this book,
Yes.
Fargo Street, through Frames Magazine, and I am looking to hear about all things related to it. So one of the reason we do this program is to talk about process and how you came to the final version of it. Now, this book is there's not actually a Fargo Street, is there?
No.
No. So this is a street photography in Fargo.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So tell us about it. Tell us about this lovely black and white book.
Ever since I understood there was a thing called street photography, I have been in love with it. It is serendipitous. It is immediate. It's the kind of thing where you're not thinking in advance, oh, I'm a landscape photographer or I'm a wedding photographer. You've just got your camera with you and you're walking around and you're looking for cool things. And sometimes you can sit and wait for cool things to come through a composition. My style more is just to keep walking because something's going to come along. With this project, I did not set out to do a book. I set out just to take pictures that interested me and I thought would interest other people. But over time, you develop a collection. Over time, that collection begins to develop some kind of coherency. Some images, fit, some images don't. And when I got to a critical mass of images, I started to think about Fargo, because Fargo is the right size for street photography to begin. It's not New York, it's not London, Paris, that kind of stuff, but it is big enough to be quirky, to be interesting, to be, or I should say multi-layered interesting. You can have a town of 12 people and it's interesting, but not in 1,000 layers. It's going to be interesting in one or two ways. So I started to think, what could street photography really say about Fargo? I went through images for about 6 years worth of images I went through. And the oldest image in the book is about 6 years. The rest of them are only from probably the last two, when I started to think what I was doing. And I said, okay, I have something to say about Fargo via street photography. Now let's see if anybody wants to publish this.
And you got a yes, I assume, because it's here. Well, so let me ask you this. So these are square format images for street. Are you shooting with a medium format camera? Is that so? How do they end up being square?
The pleasure of post-production. No, I use an entry-level camera, the Nikon Z50, which I love. It has never not been able to do something that I want it to do. But square, even before I understood that's what medium format does, you look at a square picture differently than you look at any others. Someone have done studies that you begin in the center and move out versus left to right or top to bottom or whatever. And I have always just viscerally, had a gut reaction to square images that I have found them more compelling. There are, not in the book, obviously, but, there are pictures that I've taken where the square doesn't work. Something about the composition demanded something. I posted one on Facebook just this morning. That's, a vertical shot because I needed that composition. But square to me feels evocative. Square to me feels, a kind of, frankly, intimacy that you don't see in the others. It's a different way of engaging a picture.
No, I think that's right. I think it's I have never, or only very, very rarely in a long time ago, shot in a square format because I don't see that way. But is that how you see? Is that how your imagery works in your head when you're capturing it?
Well, there's two answers for that. I have my EVF set to square. And so when
Okay,
I look through the camera,
that's what you're doing.
I am certainly seeing a square, and that aids in composition a lot. And I don't know if I see with just my eyes square or that way, but it's that kind of center weighted mentality. I think center long before I think rule of thirds or that kind of stuff. And so I think that was just why it felt natural for me.
Talk to me about the process of coming up with the book. You mentioned that you sort of conceptualized Fargo. Is that where
Hmm.
you started? Is that with the book? And is your initial concept what you ended up with, or did you move in a different direction at any point?
No, I mean, surprisingly, this is exactly what I hoped for. I'm the example of it shouldn't be, and it never is really this easy. But I am affiliated with Frames Magazine. I do their
Yep.
book reviews and the podcast and stuff. And so when I started to get the critical mass together here, I asked Tomasz, the editor, I said, hey, I got this project going on. And he said, one of the things that he's wanted to do, and that Frames as a company has wanted to do, is test the waters with monographs, test the waters with book publishing. And I said, well, guess what? I got one. So he
Me
and I,
first.
yeah, he and I started chatting, and publishing photo books is, for a lot of people, tremendously difficult, tremendously expensive. A lot of photographers are asked to put in a lot of their own cash,
Yeah.
to get one published. And then, distribution and longevity are issues. But Tomasz and I have a long-term conversation because we work together. So we solved these things bit by bit over time. We decided to do a pre-sale, and so that we knew before the printer press started to run that the costs were covered. He was happy with breaking even. A lot of publishers aren't,
Mhm.
and it's gone beyond that. He has his own investment in quality paper, quality cover, this kind of stuff. So, he was answering a lot of his own questions that way.
Right.
We knew it was going to be square. The cover design, all that kind of stuff, came straight out of the designers for Frames Magazine. But I could not be happier because he had all sorts of issues. And black and white printing is really tough. It's actually tougher than printing on color. And to get the press and the paper and the final product to all be his standards was a real joy to watch.
Well, tell me about all of the different decision points that you had to go through. So you've decided, and I assume you did this with the folks at Friends Magazine. Did you have a designer that you worked with, or and is that the folks at Frames that helped you with that?
Yes. Yeah. No, Frames has a designer, a wonderful woman named Danny, and she was involved with the book. I sent over, hey, this is what I think the cover should look like, and they sort of patted me on the head and said, "That's cute." It's I do not have a good design sense. I'm afraid. My initial idea of the color cover and all this was innocent, basically unsophisticated, and they came back and I said, no, this is what we want. So they would propose, and I would understand the wisdom of their proposal and say, yeah, let's do this. Their ability to imagine paper and cover and ink and all that is much bigger than my experience allows me to imagine. There were a lot of decision points, and a lot of them had absolutely nothing to do with me or my work. Tomasz would get a proof, and he'd say, "No, I'm not happy with the contrast with this. Let's change and not change the picture, change something in the printing to make it more what he was looking for." That was a blessing. The book could have gone a completely different direction in terms of sequencing. It could have been more seasonal. It could have been, here's a spring section, a summer section,
Right.
a fall,
Right. Right.
a winter. And we very consciously decided, no, we don't want that kind of an arc in the book. So there are, winter pictures next to summer. There's rain versus, the sun, because what we wanted was a kind of braided, multi-thematic tour through the book. And the images that made it into the book, there were probably 10 or 15 that were in the running that didn't make it. and didn't make it because they were too close to something that we already had, or they were too different from everything else in the book. But you'll notice, the book also includes things that are not necessarily thought of first when you think of street photography. There are portraits, there's landscape shots.
Yeah.
There, you have architecture shots as well as action shots. There's a burning house, there's a plant. My goal was to have this kind of deep and broad dive into what Fargo looks like to me. And Tomasz and the designers and all that said, let's do it.
Well, so one of the interesting things about this is, I mean, you're a writer.
Mm-hmm.
The written word is pretty limited in this.
Yeah, none of mine.
Did you feel that the need to, like, how did that not happen? Because it would seem like as a writer that would be something you go, oh, I'm going to put some writing and some nice stuff in here.
I have done that before. I have a book called A Moment with Strangers that is half photography, half writing. But that's still considered a writing book, with a lot of pictures versus a photo book. Because I review a lot of photo books, I've really appreciated the ones that are very light on text. I don't like being directed in terms of my initial response to images. I want to have that one-on-one. So we did ask Amy Vitale to write a short forward for this one, which she did, just 2 pages. And the rest of it is just, no, gang, make of it what you will. Having said that, however, I consider myself a visual storyteller with a strong narrative thread. And so at the individual image level, as well as throughout the book, I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to create a narrative. It's not in text this time, but it's certainly informed by my history with writing narrative.
As a person who has written about, when you write about books for frames or for wherever you do that, do you consider that to be a critical review? I mean, and the reason I ask that is how would you write about your book?
This book is the best book that has ever been written. Matter of fact, you are allowed to buy several hundred copies each. No, that's I do review photo books for frames, and what I admire is somebody who has a story they want to give some voice to. It could be their own story, it could be somebody else's story, but it's not just here is an oversaturated, sunset or something. The power of the image to imply narrative, to create a compelling before the image, after the image understanding is moving. I mean, you see stuff and you think, there is something that brought this scene to be. There is something that's going to come afterwards. And the best images for me and the best books for me are the ones where I open to a page and 5 minutes later, I'm sort of half looking at the page, but also looking at the ceiling, just, wondering about the world around that image.
What did you learn from this book? What did you learn from the process? I mean, and this is I asked this and to the audience so they know you've published a lot of books.
Yeah.
So this is not your first rodeo. What did this one teach you?
A lot of what this book taught me happened even before I was doing the book, and that was how to do street photography. How to do it in a town that's small enough a lot of people know you. And, you're not just the invisible stranger in New York walking around with a camera. I learned all sorts of ways to respect people I disagree with, to disagree with people I respect. You begin to negotiate with your town, and especially when you're out a lot and people see you not just once, but they see you week after week after week, strolling around, with your camera. So it taught me a different relationship or I shouldn't say different. It taught me a much deeper, a much more generous, much more wonderful relationship with the town where I live. And the process of actually doing the book is the most involved I've been in a book, because all my other books, the ones with writing, I send off to a publisher. I'll get a copy edited version back. at some point, but I have no input, zero, in design, distribution, cover, the rest of it. That's all handled by those people, and they are aware that the writers are generally not good people when it comes to design and
Sure.
this kind of stuff. So I learned an awful lot about bookmaking. I learned an awful lot about why people buy photo books. It was a wonderful experience.
Well, that's actually a question I would like to have answered. Why do people buy photo books? So inform us what you learned about that, because I want to know.
In this case, there's sort of three audiences. There is the local audience, the Fargo audience.
Fargo, yep.
This is everybody's favorite coffee table book right now. And over Christmas when I was signing books out at the bookstore, people were often buying two, and they'd say, no, one's for for my living room, the other one I'm sending to some relative
Who moved away,
who isn't here to
Yeah.
show them what the town is like. So you've got that audience. You've also got the audience that is just into photography or into street photography and said, I probably don't need another book about New York, but what the hell is Fargo? I don't
Fargo.
even know what a Fargo is, other than a TV. So they wind up getting the book, because it's a different take on a style they know. Then there's just the people who, pick it up. These pictures are nice, and off they go.
I like your discussion about the difference between small town street and big city street, because I generally work in Boston, and I've been noodling a book about Boston for a long period of time, which is why I ask about the audience and who's going to buy. But it is because I am in Boston, invisible. I don't interact, but you can't do that in that smaller town like Fargo.
Even in Boston, you can imagine if you were to do a book, a whole photo book just about Faneuil Hall, okay, and you hung out there, week after week. Pretty soon, all the shopkeepers know you. Pretty soon, the tour guides know you. Pretty soon, this relationship starts, and you get invited, little backstage here, or a little behind the scenes over there. It winds up being an act of intimacy, an act of appreciation.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with the bigger towns, Fargo's small enough that I could do a pretty broad as well as deep look. If Fargo were any bigger, I probably couldn't stay with the broad. I would have to say, no, I'm writing about a certain aspect or a certain culture. I'm going to be photographing, here in town in a couple of weeks, a blues festival, and just limiting everything to that. But when you go on.
Well, I was just going to say you touch on actually what is my perceived greatest weakness as a street photographer in Boston is that lack of intimacy, because I can be invisible, and so my imagery tends not to have that personal connection that yours does in so many cases in this book.
Yeah, and we should mention there are really different and competing schools of thought about the role of the photographer in street photography. I mean, there are camera brands that market their hardware on the virtue of being invisible, of being stealthy. Nobody will ever know you're taking. No, I'm not real good with that. I don't go up and introduce myself beforehand unless I'm going to do a portrait. But I'm also not hiding. I'm walking around. I've got a camera in my hand. Everyone sees what I'm doing. Yeah. To me, a relationship does not remove chance, does not remove serendipity, does not remove the accidental.
Well, Scott Olsen, Fargo Street, congratulations. It's a
Thank
lovely
you.
book, and I appreciate having it in my hand, and I'm going to enjoy it. The last question that I ask people on this series, and I'm sorry to preview this with you, but I want to catch you by surprise. What is the photo book that you would recommend to anyone who wants to know about photography?
It's an interesting question because you said photography instead of street photography or wedding or portrait or whatever. And I don't know if there is one book out there that I would say this one will tell you about photography. I just got done reviewing one called Flashes of Brilliance, which is a textbook. It's a history of photography.
Okay.
And that was absolutely fascinating. if there's one right now, or if there's a photographer right now that's really speaking to me, it'd be Phil Penman. Street photographer in New York and lots of other places. Phil has a really definitive style. And, they're dark, they're moody, there's lots of shadows, lots of fog, this kind of stuff. And it is not very much like my work, okay, but as a viewer, I find it really, really deeply pleasing and satisfying. So, I can't, cook Italian food, but I love it. So
Yeah.
this is what's going on.
Well, Phil is a friend of the program. He's been on it several times. In fact, as you talk about it, I think I should reach out to him and ask him to talk about his books as well. So, Scott Olsen, thank you so much for talking about your lovely book, Fargo Street.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. And thank you all for watching The Crit House.